What would you do if you woke up to bulldozers tearing apart the land your family had owned for 4 generations? That's exactly what happened to Jason Richards, a New York engineer who got a 6 a.m. call that turned his entire life upside down. His late grandfather's farm was being swallowed whole by an aggressive HOA development called Sunny Pines East. 86 luxury homes were rising from the soil, and according to Diane Reynolds, the cold-blooded president of the HOA, the land was theirs. But she made one fatal mistake. She messed with the wrong grandson. What started as a fight over property turned into a war of corruption, forged documents, insider politics, betrayal, embezzlement, and yes, even an old love affair gone toxic. Hidden floorboards, secret surveys, shady permits, over $400,000 stolen right under the noses of terrified homeowners. This isn't just a land dispute. It's a ticking time bomb in a small town where one man stood against an empire. If you think HOA drama is just about grass height and mailbox colors, think again. Hit subscribe and follow Real HOA Drama to uncover the truth, the lies, and the plot twists no one saw coming. You won't believe how this ends. My phone rang at 6:03 a.m. Anyone who calls at that ungodly hour better be bleeding or on fire. Or, in this case, be a furious 80-year-old neighbor from a town I hadn't visited in months. Jason Richards, is that you? Came the familiar gravelly voice of Mrs. Helen Thompson, my grandfather's neighbor, town gossip, and unofficial sheriff of Meadow Creek. Morning, Mrs. Thompson. I mumbled, still half asleep and face planted in my pillow. Everything okay? She didn't even breathe before blurting, they're building houses on your granddaddy's land. I sat up like I'd been tasered. What? Big yellow machines, trailers, men in hard hats. Looks like ants on a picnic. They started tearing up your east fields yesterday. You need to get your behind down here now. I blinked at the ceiling. My grandfather, Thomas Richards, passed away just 4 months ago. Left me the old family farm outside Meadow Creek. 200 acres of rolling hills, creaky barns, and memories of summers spent chasing chickens and digging up potatoes. But I lived in Manhattan now, working 70-hour weeks as a structural engineer and drinking coffee strong enough to clean battery acid. The farm felt like another lifetime. Still, I trusted Mrs. Thompson more than I trusted most people in my building. If she said something was wrong, it was probably on fire. By 6:15, I was shoving clothes into a duffel bag. By 6:30, I was behind the wheel of my beat-up Subaru, burning rubber on I-87. Adrenaline replacing my usual morning caffeine. 5 hours, 3 gas station coffees, and 1 speeding ticket later, I pulled off the highway and onto the dusty back road that led to the farm. Except now, it didn't feel like the peaceful countryside I remembered. It felt like a war zone. As I crested the familiar hill near the east pasture, my stomach twisted. The cornfields were gone, flattened. Dust clouds rose from the earth like smoke from a battlefield. Bulldozers and backhoes moved with mechanical indifference, tearing into soil that had fed generations of Richards' men. Spray paint marked the ground in bright orange excess. Construction trailers lined the road. A towering sign announced in bold, smug letters, "Future home of Sunny Pines East." 86 luxury homes starting at $475,000. I slammed the car into park and stumbled out, still in yesterday's jeans, staring like I'd walked into someone else's nightmare. Who in God's name gave them permission to break ground on my land? I approached a woman in beige slacks and a blouse so white I was offended by it. Her hair was perfect. Her clipboard was large. Her attitude was even larger. She didn't look up from her phone when I spoke. "Excuse me, what's happening here?" She finally glanced at me like I was a door-to-door vacuum salesman. "We're preparing for residential development. I'm Diane Reynolds, president of the Sunny Pines Homeowners Association." She extended a hand without warmth. I didn't take it. "This is my land," I said flatly. "My grandfather owned it until he passed. I inherited it." Diane's smile didn't reach her eyes. "There must be some confusion. Sunny Pines purchased this parcel last year. Fully permitted. All legal." I stared at her like she'd just claimed ownership of the moon. My grandfather would never sell this land, I said. Perhaps he didn't tell you, she said gently, like she was consoling a child who just learned Santa isn't real. She handed me a business card and turned away. You're welcome to contact our legal department. My fists clenched. Behind her, another machine ripped into the earth where Grandpa Tom used to plant soybeans. I had driven 5 hours for this, and it looked like I had just walked into a war I didn't know had started. But one thing was certain. They messed with the wrong grandson. If Smug had a face, it was Diane Reynolds. I found her standing like a general surveying her conquest, clipboard tucked under her arm, her phone glued to her ear as if her voice alone could keep the bulldozers moving. She wore tailored beige slacks and a crisp blouse so blindingly white I half expected it to come with its own dry-cleaning contract. Not a speck of dust dared land on her, even as clouds of dirt billowed in every direction from the construction site. This was not her first hostile takeover. That much was clear. "Excuse me," I said, my boots crunching over the gravel, heart pounding like a jackhammer in my chest. She finished her call without so much as glancing up, then turned with a kind of slow, practiced precision that let you know she was already deciding how to dismiss you. Her eyes flicked down at my travel-wrinkled clothes, pausing just long enough to categorize me, probably as rural cousin with no manners or random local nuisance. "I'm Diane Reynolds," she said coolly, extending her hand like it was a business transaction. "President of the Sunny Pines Homeowners Association. How can I help you?" I didn't shake her hand. "I'm Jason Richards. And this," I motioned toward the chaos unfolding on the east fields, "is my land." She blinked once. That was it. No gasp. No shocked expression. Just a slight raising of one eyebrow. "I believe you're mistaken," she said, folding her arms like she was about to explain the difference between gelato and ice cream. "Sunny Pines Development purchased this property last year. Everything was finalized. Permits, survey, closing documents, all done above board." "Impossible," I snapped. "My grandfather would never sell this land. He built his life here. This farm's been in our family for 4 generations." Diane offered me the kind of smile people save for toddlers who've just declared they want to be astronauts. Pity wrapped in condescension. "Well," she said gently, "perhaps he didn't tell you." My jaw clenched. I felt like someone had just kicked me in the gut while offering a sugar cookie. "He told me plenty, including the fact that this land was never going anywhere." She didn't flinch. "I understand this might be difficult for you," she continued, already flipping through the pages on her clipboard, "but the sale was finalized 9 months ago. The deed is recorded. If you have concerns, I'd recommend contacting our legal team." She handed me a glossy white business card with gold lettering. It even smelled like wealth. I took it, mostly, so I wouldn't throw it at her. "Now if you'll excuse me," she said, putting the phone back to her ear. "We're a bit behind schedule already." She turned away as if our entire conversation had been a mild inconvenience, like spilling decaf on a cashmere throw. I stood there, heart racing, watching her retreat into her little empire of concrete and entitlement. Behind me, the machines kept roaring. The ground kept breaking. The land that held my grandfather's sweat and stories and stubborn pride was being eaten alive, inch by inch, while some HOA queen waved her clipboard like a sword. She thought this was over. She thought I'd walk away. She thought I was just a grieving grandson with no idea what I was doing. She had no idea who she was dealing with. And she sure as hell didn't know what my grandfather had left behind. Grandpa's office hadn't changed since the day he passed. The old wooden desk still sat beneath the dusty window, its surface scattered with yellowed papers, a chipped mug full of dried pens, and a rusted lamp that had probably survived 3 blackouts and 1 minor electrical fire. The air smelled like pipe tobacco and old leather, comforting and stubborn, like the man himself. I hadn't stepped foot in here since the funeral. Couldn't bring myself to touch anything. But now I needed answers. If Diane Reynolds was right, if there really was a deed showing a sale from 9 months ago, then either Grandpa had done something wildly out of character, or someone was lying through their teeth. And I knew my grandfather. He didn't lie.
He didn't bend.
He didn't sell. I opened drawer after drawer, leafed through boxes of crop reports, repair logs, even a ledger tracking the number of eggs collected every week since 1972. The man was meticulous. Somewhere in this room was the truth. Hours passed. The sun dipped lower. I flipped through every folder in the filing cabinet, my eyes burning from the strain. Every document said the same thing. The Richards farm was ours. But nothing explained why the county thought otherwise. Just as I was about to give up, my foot tapped something strange beneath the desk. A dull, hollow thud where solid wood should have been. I dropped to my knees and ran my hand along the floorboards. One of them felt slightly raised at the corner. With a quick jab from a screwdriver, it popped loose. Underneath, nestled in a dark, dusty cavity, was a small metal box. The kind you might store ammunition or secrets. There was a key taped to the underside of the desk. Classic Grandpa. The lock clicked open with a soft snap, and inside was a bundle of yellowed papers, carefully tied with twine. On top of them sat a folded letter, the envelope addressed in a familiar, shaky scrawl. To Jason, read only if it all goes wrong. My hands trembled as I opened it. If you're reading this, then someone's trying to take what's ours. I had to sit down. His handwriting was slow but deliberate. The kind of writing a man produces when he knows the clock is ticking. Developers have been sniffing around for years. I told them no every time. They offered money, favors, even threatened to condemn part of the land. I always knew they'd try something underhanded in the end. One of them came by a lot during the last year, said he just needed a signature for a road easement. He brought different papers each time. Said it was just routine. But I never signed away my land. Not one damn acre. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I kept reading. Look at the old survey, 1910. Compare it to what's in the county now. The truth's in the boundaries. Don't let him get away with it, son. Beneath the letter was exactly what he said. The original land survey from 1910, hand-drawn and watermarked, edges frayed from age. A second one from 1978 confirmed the same thing. The Richards property line extended farther east than the modern map showed, by nearly 80 acres, including the exact spot where those bulldozers were chewing up the earth. For the first time since I got that 6 a.m. phone call, I wasn't just angry, I was on fire. This wasn't a misunderstanding.
It was a theft.
And Grandpa? He hadn't just left me land. He'd left me a loaded weapon.
A map.
A letter. And a trap. And Diane Reynolds had just walked right into it. Walter Wallace looked like he'd walked straight out of a Norman Rockwell painting, minus the pie. He wore suspenders, a bow tie that had definitely seen the Reagan administration, and those old man glasses that magnified his eyes just enough to make you second-guess your own dimensions. His office smelled like dusty law books and black coffee. On the walls were faded degrees and a photo of him shaking hands with a governor I vaguely remembered from a scandal 10 years ago. "You believe Sunny Pines is building on land that legally belongs to you?" he asked, raising an eyebrow as he sipped from a chipped World's Best Lawyer mug. "I don't just believe it," I said, unfolding the old surveys across his cluttered desk. "I know it." I handed him Grandpa's letter and the 1910 survey, followed by the 1978 update, then dropped the county's current map like a punchline. Walter leaned in, tracing the boundary lines with the tip of a bony finger, his expression slowly shifting from polite curiosity to barely contained disbelief. "This is highly irregular," he muttered. "That's lawyer speak for somebody's lying, right?" He didn't answer. Instead, he picked up his landline, yes, an actual landline, and started dialing. What followed was a maze of transfers, hold music from hell, and conversations with county clerks, zoning staff, and one lady who clearly thought he was her ex-husband. Finally, after nearly an hour, Walter leaned back, folded his arms, and gave me a look I'd later recognize as his "it's about to hit the fan" expression. "In 1984, he said, there was a 10-foot utility easement added to the eastern boundary. Pretty standard. But in 1997, he pulled out a printout with a shaky signature and a stamp that looked like it had been forged with a potato. This document reduced your family's land by over 80 acres. He tapped the signature, supposedly signed by her grandfather. But according to hospital records, he was recovering from triple bypass surgery at the time. I stared at the paper. He couldn't hold a pen then, let alone sign a deed. Walter nodded grimly. Then we're not just talking about a mistake. This could be fraud. And if those 20 existing homes are on your property, then Diane Reynolds has a much bigger problem than a court hearing. I finished for him. Walter cracked his knuckles, loudly, like dry twigs snapping in a forest. We're filing for an emergency injunction to halt construction immediately. We'll also petition the court to recognize the original surveys and open an investigation into the 1997 boundary change. He looked at me with that mix of determination and grandfatherly worry. But fair warning, Jason, this won't be a clean fight. You're going up against money, politics, and people who play dirty. I shrugged. My grandfather once wrestled a coyote to save a chicken coop. I think I can handle a few corrupt bureaucrats. By 4 p.m., the papers were filed. By 6 o'clock, the judge issued a temporary injunction. All construction at Sunny Pines East must stop immediately pending review. I drove back to the farm with a copy of the court order in my passenger seat like it was the Constitution. When I arrived, the bulldozers were still humming, tearing up the earth like nothing had happened. Not for long. I stepped onto the dirt lot with the order in hand, heart pounding, dust in my throat. Diane Reynolds emerged from her air-conditioned SUV, stilettos clicking on the gravel. She looked at me like I'd tracked manure into her marble foyer. "Construction stops now," I said, holding out the document. Her perfect smile wavered for the first time, and I realized something. I wasn't alone anymore. I had the law on my side. And maybe, just maybe, I had a town full of people waiting for someone to finally stand up to Sunny Pines. Let the fight begin. The email landed in my inbox at 2:13 a.m. No subject line. No signature. Just a simple message, typed in all lowercase letters like the sender was either whispering or terrified. If you want to know where the HOA money goes, check Sunny Pines Financials, June 2022. I stared at the screen for a solid minute, rereading it 3 times like the words might rearrange themselves into something less cryptic. They didn't. Attached was a single PDF file. I hesitated. In movies, this is where the hero opens the file and their laptop explodes. But in real life, especially in Meadow Creek, the only thing that ever blew up was someone's septic tank after a bad zoning permit. Still, I ran a virus check. Old habits. When the file finally opened, I found myself looking at pages of budget spreadsheets, expense reports, and internal memos, all stamped with the Sunny Pines HOA logo. At first glance, it looked like standard accounting: landscaping fees, security contracts, clubhouse renovations. Nothing flashy. But then I noticed a pattern. Over $427,000 in maintenance expenses had been paid out, all to companies with names like Sunshine Consulting, Blue Ridge Solutions, and Oak Lane Partners. Every one of them had the same billing address. A quick Google search confirmed my suspicion. They were all tied to Diane Reynolds' family. Some were registered to her husband, 1 to her daughter, 2 to her son-in-law. It was a financial spiderweb, and every thread led right back to Diane's perfectly manicured fingers. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or throw a chair through my front window. Before I could decide, another email came in. "My name's Lisa. I work for Diane. Or at least I did. Your grandfather once fixed my car for free when I was 19 and broke. Said I reminded him of his wife. I owe him. She's stealing from everyone. Do what he'd do." I stared at the screen, speechless.
Grandpa.
Of course. He was the kind of man who helped people without expecting anything in return. Changed oil, fixed fences, gave rides to church. And now, even from the grave, he was still changing things. Lisa had included more files. Emails between Diane and board members. Meeting minutes that had never been shared with residents. A budget approval memo signed, ironically, on the same day Diane held a press conference about fiscal responsibility. This wasn't just about stolen land anymore. This was theft, corruption, embezzlement, all hidden under HOA letterhead and fine print. I grabbed my phone and texted Walter Wallace. "You up?" 3 dots appeared, then vanished. Then, "If I wasn't, I am now." "What's wrong?" "I just found our silver bullet." I looked out the window. The farmhouse was quiet. The moon hung low over the eastern field, where construction had finally gone silent. But I knew this was just the calm before the next storm. Diane Reynolds didn't know it yet, but someone from her camp had flipped. The queen had a traitor in her castle. And thanks to Lisa, I had the keys to the vault. The HOA was about to learn that you can only build so many lies before they collapse under their own weight. And I was ready to bring the whole thing down, brick by brick. There are few things more intimidating than standing in front of 100 angry homeowners, especially when half of them think you're about to take their house. The Sunny Pines Community Center was packed wall to wall. Folding chairs filled the room, the air thick with nervous chatter and the faint scent of Costco punch. Some people leaned against the walls. Others sat stiffly, arms crossed. All eyes were locked on me as I stood at the front of the room, heart pounding, hands sweating through the folder that held the truth. And just a few feet away, dressed in red like she was preparing for a political campaign ad, was Diane Reynolds, seated with her arms folded, her lips pursed so tightly you'd think smiling might violate an HOA regulation. I took a deep breath. "My name is Jason Richards," I said, voice steady but sharp, "and my grandfather owned Willow Creek Farm, what you now know as Sunny Pines East." There were a few murmurs. A man in the back whispered, "I thought that land was sold years ago." I held up the first document. "This," I said, "is the original land survey. Dated 1910. Hand-drawn. Stamped.
Filed.
Legal." I held up a second sheet. "This is the 1978 update. Verified. Still intact." According to both of these, the Richards property stretches 80 acres farther east than what the county records currently show. I turned slowly, scanning the faces. "That includes the field where you're building 86 new homes." More murmurs. Tension crackled like dry leaves underfoot. "And it also includes," I paused, "the Sunny Pines clubhouse."
Gasps.
Someone knocked over a folding chair. "And," I continued, pulling out the last sheet like a magician revealing the final card in a deadly hand, "Diane Reynolds' personal residence." Diane shot to her feet. "That's a lie," she barked, grabbing one of the papers. "This is manipulation. You're trying to scare these people." "I'm trying to inform them," I said calmly, "because for years, they've been lied to." The room erupted. Some people stood up, others pulled out their phones to take photos of the documents. An older couple near the front gripped each other's hands. I saw a woman crying quietly in the corner. And in that moment, the line between legal battle and human impact became razor-thin. A man shouted, "Does this mean I'm going to lose my house?" I raised my hands. "No," I said. "No one here is going to lose their home because of me. That's not why I'm here." I stepped forward, voice ringing louder now. "I didn't come back to Meadow Creek to rip away your lives. I didn't dig up these documents to bulldoze your memories. I came here because my grandfather was robbed. We were robbed. And you deserve to know the truth about who's been profiting from your fear and silence." I looked Diane dead in the eye. "I don't want your house. I want justice." The room went quiet. No yelling. No accusations. Just a heavy, collective exhale, like 100 people had been holding their breath for years, and someone had finally given them permission to breathe. Then, softly, a voice from the back. "What do we do now?" I smiled just a little. "We stop letting one person speak for all of us." Diane sat down slowly, her mask cracking, jaw tight. She'd just realized something far more terrifying than losing her house. She was no longer in control of the room. And the fire she'd lit beneath other people's homes? It was about to burn through her own. It started with a concrete block. One morning, I woke up to find the long gravel driveway leading to Grandpa's farmhouse blocked by 3 massive concrete barriers. Just sitting there like tombstones for common sense. No warning. No note. Just a smug white sticker slapped on the side. Property access restricted. Sunny Pines Development Committee. They might as well have signed it with love. Diane. Then the lights went out. Then the water. Then a certified letter arrived accusing me of fraudulent documentation and malicious interference with a legally approved housing development. The cherry on top? My violation of community standards, which apparently included the placement of my car, my dog barking past 8 p.m., and the unauthorized installation of my grandfather's old porch swing. That swing had been there since Nixon was in office. I called the sheriff's office, gave them a calm read, furious explanation, and asked for help. What I got was laughter, followed by an "I'm sorry, sir, but this is a civil matter." Then came the kicker. "You'll need to take it up with the HOA legal counsel." "Oh, you mean the same people suing me?" I said, "who shut off my power and blocked my driveway." "Again, sir, civil matter." When I asked to speak with the sheriff himself, I was told he was unavailable. At a golf tournament, sponsored by, you guessed it, Sunny Pines, and playing alongside Commissioner Harris, the planning board director, and Diane Reynolds' husband, Doug. Small-town politics, where everyone plays golf and justice sits alone at the clubhouse bar. I was trapped, literally and politically. I couldn't drive into town. I couldn't shower. My phone was at 12%, and the nearest charger was in the truck. The HOA had me boxed in like a bad chess move. And that's when I saw her name pop up on my screen. Janet Rivera. She hadn't changed her number since high school. I hadn't seen her since our 10-year reunion. She was editor of the school paper back then. Now she ran the Meadow Creek Gazette with the same fire and slightly improved grammar. Her message was short. "Heard about the HOA drama. You still hate Diane? I've got questions and a recorder." I texted back faster than I'd ever replied to anyone not holding pizza. "Come quick. Bring batteries. And maybe donuts." An hour later, Janet rolled up in a dusty Toyota, ducked around the concrete blockade like it was a speed bump, and stepped out with a press badge, a shoulder bag full of notebooks, and the expression of a woman who'd been waiting for a scandal worth chasing. "Still the best hair in town," I said, grinning.
She smirked.
"Still the biggest mess magnet in town, I see." We hugged, fast and familiar. Then she pulled out a recorder. "I've been hearing whispers for years about Sunny Pines. Quiet buyouts, shady fines, fast-tracked permits. But no one would talk. Now you show up waving original land surveys like dynamite, and boom, Diane calls in every favor in the book to shut you down. She's got the sheriff, the commissioner, the building inspector, and probably Santa Claus in her pocket," I said. Janet raised an eyebrow.
"Good.
"Then this'll be big." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. Diane had a power network, yes, but I was starting to build one of my own. And now I had a reporter, a truth-teller, and an old friend who smelled blood in the water. The game was changing, and the queen was about to face checkmate. Janet always had a nose for secrets. Even in high school, she could sniff out a love triangle faster than you could say, homecoming scandal. So it didn't surprise me when, after just 2 days digging through my grandfather's belongings, she came down the farmhouse stairs holding something with the wide-eyed reverence of someone who had just found buried treasure or a live grenade. "I found his old journals," she whispered. I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been cross-referencing HOA tax filings with the enthusiasm of someone slowly losing his grip on reality. "Anything good?" She held up a leather-bound notebook, worn and frayed, tied shut with a red ribbon. "You have no idea." We sat at the kitchen table, the same one Grandpa used to sort seeds and drink coffee so strong it could remove paint. Janet untied the ribbon, flipped past a few pages of crop notes and weather reports, and finally landed on a folded piece of paper, tucked into a page like a pressed flower. It was a letter, handwritten.
To Diane. Vienna.
"I know what you want. I know you think love should conquer all. But you and I were made from different things. You were born to build empires. I was born to guard the dirt. This land isn't just property. It's blood, roots,
bones.
You are beautiful. You are fire. But I will not sell my soul, no matter how sweet the kiss. I choose this land. and I choose to leave it whole. I stared at the paper like it might burst into flames. Janet blinked. Your grandpa turned her down. Not just her, I said slowly. Her offer. Her entire vision. She wanted him to sell the land. Probably saw potential even back then. And he said no. Janet shook her head. Not just no, he rejected her. We both sat in stunned silence, the letter lying between us, like a ghost in the room. It made perfect sense. The coldness in Diane's voice every time she said, your grandfather. The way she clenched her jaw when I mentioned family. This wasn't just about real estate. This was personal. A woman scorned, and not just scorned romantically. Scorned ideologically. Grandpa Thomas hadn't just broken her heart. He'd rejected the very foundation of who she was becoming. A builder. A power broker. Someone who saw land not as legacy, but as leverage. And now, 40 years later, she had come back. Not with love letters or second chances, but bulldozers and lawyers. She's not just trying to develop this property, Janet said, eyes narrowing. She's trying to erase him. I nodded slowly. And I'm standing in her way. That night, I walked the eastern field alone. The stars blinked above the tree line, the air cool and heavy with the scent of cut grass and coming rain. I could almost hear him, Grandpa, whispering in the wind, reminding me why he fought so hard to keep this land intact. Why he buried the deed, the maps, the letter. Why he knew that one day someone like me, someone with fire but also roots, would need to finish the fight. Diane thought this was a business war. She thought I was just a stubborn heir. But this was never about property lines. This was about legacy. And the moment she let love turn into vengeance, she lost the only battle that ever truly mattered. Because Grandpa may have chosen the land over her,
But I
chose to defend both. I never thought I'd become a door-to-door rebel. But there I was, clipboard in hand, folder full of documents under one arm, knocking on doors like a political candidate who'd traded campaign promises for truth bombs. House after house, porch after porch, I stood face to face with people who once thought the HOA was their protector, only to learn it had slowly become their prison. Ma'am, I said to Mrs. Jenkins, a retired teacher with a garden full of wilting sunflowers, this is the original survey. According to the real boundaries, your house is sitting on what used to be my grandfather's farmland. Her eyes widened. So we're trespassing? No, I said quickly. You're victims.
just like me.
The problem isn't you, it's the people who sold you that house with forged records and hidden motives. She looked down at her HOA fine notice, a $200 penalty for putting up a mailbox with the wrong shade of blue. Well, she said, voice rising, it's about damn time someone stood up to them. By the end of the week, I'd knocked on 96 doors. 83 families signed the petition. We called it the Meadow Creek Homeowners Coalition, not a rebellion, but a reckoning. Our mission, to return transparency, fairness, and community to a place that had slowly been poisoned by fear. And once people started talking, the floodgates burst wide open. I got fined $500 for having my grandson's swing set in the front yard, one dad told me. They said it violated aesthetic continuity. He's 5. He just wanted to swing. They told me my tomato plants weren't ornamental, said Mrs. Patel, and made my husband dig up half our garden. They said my welcome mat was too colorful, a young woman whispered. Then they said my dog barked too much. Now I'm afraid to open the blinds. This wasn't a homeowners association. It was a dictatorship in pearls and pantyhose. And the dictator had a name, Diane Reynolds. But the final blow didn't come from me. It came from someone inside the enemy's camp. Late one night, as I was reviewing survey scans on my laptop, I heard a soft knock at the farmhouse door. It was Gerald Fisher, the HOA's treasurer. Nervous, pale, sweating through his collar like a man with a secret too big to carry any longer. I shouldn't be here, he said. Then why are you? He pulled a flash drive from his pocket. Because this isn't just about boundary lines anymore. It's about theft, about lies. And I won't be part of it. Inside were 3 years' worth of financial records. Special assessments billed to homeowners, then funneled into shell companies with friendly names: Sunshine Property Solutions, Silverline Security, Willow Tree Legal Consulting. All of them connected to Diane Reynolds' family. Over $400,000 had been siphoned from people who'd paid their dues, followed the rules, and been punished anyway. The community had funded Diane's empire without even knowing it. I looked up at Gerald. "You just turned the tide." He nodded. "It's time we stopped being afraid." And just like that, the battle lines shifted. This wasn't just about a farm anymore. This was about an entire neighborhood waking up. We weren't fighting for the land anymore. We were fighting with the land, every square inch of it soaked in truth, legacy, and the voices of people who'd finally had enough. Diane built her HOA like a fortress. But she forgot the most important rule of walls. They don't protect you if the people inside start tearing them down. The courtroom was quieter than I expected. The air, thick with anticipation, seemed to hold its breath, as if the entire town had gathered to witness what they knew was coming, what had been coming for years. Diane Reynolds sat across from me, her eyes cold and unblinking, the facade of confidence she had worn like armor now slipping at the edges. I could see the faintest tremor in her hands as she adjusted her perfectly pressed suit. But it was too late. The game was up. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court," the judge called, his voice gravelly with the weight of decades on the bench. "We will now hear the final presentation of evidence in the case of Richards versus Sunny Pines Development." I stood, feeling the eyes of the room on me, the years of doubt and frustration giving way to a clarity I hadn't known I needed. "I've come here today not to take homes away from families," I began, my voice steady, but carrying the weight of everything I had uncovered, "but to return them to the people who built them. These homes and the land they sit on have been stolen, by forgery, by corruption, and by lies." I could feel Diane's gaze burning through me, but I wasn't intimidated anymore. Not by her. Not by any of it. "Diane Reynolds," I said, as I walked toward the table where the evidence lay, "used her influence to falsify property records. In 1997, she orchestrated a fraudulent change to the land's boundaries. A change that didn't just affect me. It affected every one of you." I pulled out the original survey, the 1978 update, and the shaky 1997 document where Grandpa's supposed signature was scrawled in a way that looked nothing like the careful script he had used for decades. "According to this forged document," I continued, "my grandfather's land was reduced by over 80 acres. Acres that now lie under Sunny Pines. But we've got something else. Something you didn't expect." I turned to the county official who had arrived in the middle of the trial, someone who had spent years verifying records in the backrooms of local government. "Mr. Harris," I said, "you and your office did a full audit of the 1997 boundary change. Can you confirm what we found?" Mr. Harris stood, his expression grim. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. "The 1997 boundary change was not only unauthorized but also falsified. We've opened an official investigation into the matter. We found the signature on that document was not legitimate. It's a forgery." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. But the real shock came when he added, "As for the financial irregularities tied to Sunny Pines Development, Diane Reynolds is under investigation for embezzling over $400,000 from the Homeowners Association." It felt like the floor dropped out from under me. Diane's face drained of color. She looked like someone had hit her with a sledgehammer. Before she could respond, the bailiff moved swiftly, handcuffing her in front of the entire courtroom. "Diane Reynolds, you are under arrest for fraud, financial embezzlement, and falsifying public records." Her protests fell on deaf ears as she was led out of the courtroom, the high heels she had worn like a badge of authority clicking against the tile floor, now echoing the final steps of her fall from grace. I turned back to the room, my heart still pounding in my chest. This land isn't just mine. It belongs to this community. It always has. The judge cleared his throat. "The court recognizes the authenticity of the original property surveys and hereby declares the 1997 boundary change null and void. This land reverts to its rightful owner, and the existing development will be subject to new environmental assessments." As the judge declared his final ruling, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Not just for me, but for the hundreds of families who had been manipulated by Diane's power. The project would now be reworked into something that respected both the land and the people. The wetlands Grandpa had fought for would be preserved, and the homes would be built with the environment in mind, not profit margins. Later that evening, under a sky streaked with pink and orange, Janet and I stood on the porch, watching the last of the bulldozers drive away. The farm that had once seemed like a relic was now the center of something much bigger, a community built not on lies, but on trust and truth. "We did it," I said, looking at her. "We really did it." She smiled, her eyes reflecting the glow of the setting sun. "You did it. You're your grandfather's legacy." I looked toward the horizon, where the rich, rolling fields stretched before us, peaceful once again. In that moment, I could almost hear Grandpa's voice in the wind. And I knew he would be proud. "Mr. Richards," Mrs. Thompson said from the porch swing, handing me a glass of iced tea, "your grandfather would be bursting with pride." I took the glass and smiled, raising it toward the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "To Grandpa," I whispered. "And to what comes next," Janet added, her hand slipping into mine as we stood there together, knowing the fight for Meadow Creek wasn't just over, it had just begun.